Smisha Tomás de Burke, as Cahar Corky. I'm Tom Burke from Cork, from Grace Church in Cork, and I've been asked by both ARC and the Salt guys to speak today just about what should we look for when we're planting a church from the point of view of a venue, a portable church. And then they've also asked me to speak about my experience as a church planter. So I'm going to just bring out one aspect with the time limit I have today. So the first one, I'm calling it, Where's Your Church? If you can see the little photograph on the screen, maybe you can't. This is, anybody know where that is?
West Kerry.
Yeah, very good. Any little bit closer and give you a hint? Skellig Vihil. Bang on, that's where Star Wars went. So this was a very early Irish Celtic Christian church in one of the most remote locations in Europe, right way out facing thousands of miles of the Atlantic Ocean. And what a spot to have a church. Wouldn't you like to have your church there today, looking at the seagulls? No, okay. But the issue is you certainly wouldn't be able to reach people because there's nobody living there. So, where should we put our church? And if you're planting a church here in Ireland, what are the general things we all need to look out for, and what are the specific Irish issues that we need to look out for? So this is my experience when we were planting a church, and a lot of it kind of emerged over time. So what are your priorities? So what is your church type? What is the demographic or the type of person you really want to reach? And what are the priorities for you with your physical and social situation? So what do I mean by that? I just think you can save yourself an awful lot of hassle, an awful lot of frustration if you do a little bit of praying and thinking. I'm sure you do it anyway, but we really need to do a bit of prayer and thought as to how we want to start out. When we started our church almost 20 years ago, we decided to start in a very quiet suburb, or a quiet place in a suburb of Cork. And we did it there because I suppose I didn't feel confident enough to go into the city centre. I didn't think I was ready ministerially or maturity-wise to really take on a city centre. So we started small and we learnt all of our mistakes, as it were, in a smaller situation. So the church type for us and the demographic we were reaching and our priorities. So let's just look at church type first. Are you a rural church? Are you hoping to plant in a town, a market town, in a suburb, or are you going to be an urban city centre downtown church, such as here in St. Mark's in Dublin, or for us at the moment at Grace Church in the city centre of Cork? Some very interesting statistics came out just yesterday from the EU, and all over the European Union. They began to look at people's quality of life in different types of settings. And they found that people who lived in rural areas, that's 42%, almost half the people of Ireland live in a rural area. This is obviously the Republic. But people who lived in a rural area or people who lived in a very urban downtown area were fairly okay when it came to community and social inclusion. But people who lived in suburbs or in towns were the most socially isolated. Now, anyone looking to plant a church would be very foolish not to take these little gems of information that we get for free, whether it's from the European Union or from the Irish Central Statistics Office, the CSO. So if you're aiming to go for a suburb or a town, the chances are people will be a lot lonelier, a lot more open to some type of community situation, and that means that probably planting a church, you've got a slightly easier sell, as it were, in those environments. But when you're trying to think of your church type, I don't think anyone who hopes to be rural is going to get confused with being in an urban city centre setup. But I think the other two kind of mesh in together. So are you really a suburban church or are you a town church? Some of you are from Navan. Navan is its own town. But if you start going into Blanchardstown or whatever, you're getting very suburban. Where does the suburban end and the town start? You know, and there isn't a very clear demarcation in Ireland. You go to mainland Europe, it's very different. We're possibly a little bit more like the US model where people commute a lot further. So the density of population here in Ireland and in our cities isn't as intense as it is in Europe. So people are spread out a bit more, and all of these factors have to come into play as to where and when we're going to plant our churches. So are you suburban? We started off in a suburb. So, for example, someone who is planting in rural Kerry, I heard of a church plant in a small village between Killarney and Tralee down in Kerry. Their dynamic and how they outreach and how they do church to some degree is going to be very different from, say, us in the city centre of Cork. It's going to be very different between Clondalkin, a suburb of Dublin, and a town like Clonmel in County Tipperary. Each area has its own dynamic, and suburbs are different to towns, are different to city centres. So you really have to be clear. It doesn't mean you're going to be there forever. Perhaps like us, and I'll go into it in a moment, you might decide to start in the suburbs and move or start in a town. But this is important that you decide which type of church you are from a geographic point of view. If it's possible, try and get your head around what type of person do you think you really will win to the Lord. Anyone who's interested in church planting and doesn't have a heart for evangelism, or at least there's someone on the team who's evangelistic, really has to have a rethink, because you cannot grow church in the Republic at least, and I would suspect in many parts of Northern Ireland as well, unless you really can reach the lost and see people saved. That's the heartbeat of everything we do. So what's the type of person do you think you'd reach? For us, we've concluded that our demographic is Jerry and Julie. Julie is 30, Jerry's 32. They live on the north side of Cork City, and they usually have 1 or 2 kids. This is the type of person we are seeing overwhelmingly saved, born again, added to the church. Now, like you, I'm sure, you're probably saying to yourself, but we want to reach everyone. Of course we do. We all want to reach everyone. Amen? Amen. You got to give me a response here, guys. So we want to reach everyone. We baptized 22 people a month ago, and they were from ages 16 up to 64. So we're into reaching everyone. But if we were to really hone in on one demographic or people type, it would be this type of person. Why does that make a difference? We've just started a site plant in our church called Cafe Church, and it runs parallel downstairs on the street to our main auditorium, and we run that at 10 and 12 every Sunday. So for example, when we were starting Cafe Church and we were praying and planning all of the issues to do with that, basically, in my head anyway, I leave an empty chair at the table and Jerry and Julie are sitting at that chair. And the first question I'll ask is, would Jerry and Julie be comfortable in a cafe church? What do I mean by cafe church? It's barista coffee. The worship is a little bit more unplugged. It's a bit more chilled out. It's still the same DNA as the main church, but a slightly different feel. You've got your tables and chairs. There's a coffee break. It's a smaller setting, and the sermon is video cast onto a big screen. So I was saying, would Jerry and Julie be comfortable in a cafe church? And we said, yeah. They meet their friends in Starbucks all the time. How would they feel about watching a screen where the sermon is video cast down? Well, they go to the pub and they watch the big matches on it, and they applaud, even though the guys playing the match can't hear them. So nobody has an issue with TV. Within a nanosecond, they get it. They're there. So Jerry and Julie and their experience. Now, if it was an older generation, they probably wouldn't be into barista coffee. If it was an older generation you primarily wanted to reach, maybe they would be a little bit more uncomfortable with a big screen. But Jerry and Julie. So your demographic should really point you in the direction as to what type of venue you want and where you should put it. So if you want to reach, let's say, a working class community and you put yourself way over in a very leafy middle class suburb, we want to reach everyone, but there's a disconnect there. So try and get a venue nearest to where your demographic really live. If you're wondering, how do I determine what our demographic is? If you're starting off, I would say, who are you yourself? Because you probably will attract people who are something like you. So if you're a guy and you're big into, I don't know, GAA, and you're enthusiastic about that, chances are you'll see other guys who are enthusiastic about GAA come along. If you're into art and you love art, chances are you'll attract other artists, and so on and so on. So that's how you begin. You begin with the type of person you are yourself, or your key team people are. Are you hoping to attract ethnic minorities? Is that your heart? Or let's say you're Brazilian. Do you want to have a Brazilian church? Do you want to have a multicultural church? Do you want to do a Filipino church or an African church? Or is this really an Irish church you want to do? So you have to ask yourself all these questions, and all of these questions should determine what location primarily you should be interested in. So that's the people side. What about the practical side? And just to say that as a church, we have our own full-time building in Cork, but for 18 and a half years, we didn't. So from when we started up to a year and a half ago, we didn't have our own building. We lived or worshipped in all kinds of halls and places. And the big myth is you can't grow a church in Ireland unless you have a full-time building. You can. It's difficult, but it's possible. Having a building helps an awful lot. But if you can't have a building, which is most of us, this really should help you, and you should really be able to grow a church even though you don't have it. So let's look at some of the priorities. Oh, sorry, I'm doing the wrong one. So some of the priorities, I've put down 4 C's: cupboards, coffee, children, cars, just to help us remember. I think these are priorities for anybody who's looking to rent or lease a portable building, or rent or lease a part-time building. We never had a full-time building. We always had buildings at the weekend, and sometimes we could get it in the middle of the week. Cupboards, that's storage. Huge issue. Unless you've got a very big garage at home and you can store all your worship gear, and you've got a big van that you can transport it in, my experience is try and get a facility where they will allow you to have your own lock-up storeroom. In our first venue and in our last venue, and I'll talk about the last venue, we had our own permanent lock-up storeroom. It was worth its weight in gold. It saved us so much work and hassle. We all had all our loudspeakers, our microphones, coffee, everything. It was all there. So if a venue offered storage, or cupboards as I call it here, that's a huge benefit. And it's something a lot of new church planters don't think about. I would suggest that an awful lot of the venues in Ireland, particularly the less glitzy ones, will offer you storage in a church like this. Second C, coffee. It is my passionate belief that if you want to do church in Ireland, you have to allow for community to take place. People are craving community. When community breaks down, people break down. There's not an awful lot of community going on in Irish society. When I was a child, we ran in and out of the neighbours' homes. Everybody knew everybody's name. Now everybody hops in a car. Their friends are more Coronation Street or EastEnders than they are their neighbours. You know, community isn't that. So people are looking for community, both immigrants and Irish people, and the church is a fantastic way to offer community to people. And it's very simple. It's really allowing time and promoting and encouraging people to go for coffee or tea after the meeting, after your service, and meet with their friends. So if your facility allows you to do coffee and tea yourself, that's fantastic. It's so cheap compared to having to buy it. If you can't, then try and see if your venue allows for you to buy coffee there. So that would be something like a hotel, but it tends to be expensive. But if you can get, like we've always had coffee in all of our rented facilities over the years, we made it ourselves, and I think it was a huge part of our growth story that people could have somebody to chat to them, to listen to them, to get to know them. Never underestimate the simple things. Children, you can get some really fantastic facilities, but they have no ancillary rooms going with it. I wonder about the big push on cinemas. In my experience, a lot of cinemas will allow you to have the main auditorium up to a certain point, but you really struggle getting other smaller cinemas or other rooms to do children's work. You have to be able to minister to kids. Unless you feel you're called to just university students or something like that, you really have to consider children, and you have that means other rooms, ancillary rooms. And then cars, parking. Is there parking available? The more parking, the better. And we've always tried to go for a facility where it was possible to park nearby. Even our current facility in the city centre of Cork, one of the reasons we went for it is there was a multi-storey car park right across the street. We've done a deal with them for Sunday mornings and also for Tuesday night when we do a thing called night church, and that's huge. People want to be able to park. This coming Sunday, there's a big festival in Cork. It's a soapbox race run by Red Bull, and it really impacts us because they're closing down the street. So we're really going to take a hit next Sunday. It only happens once every 5 or 10 years, but we'll take a hit because people won't be able to pull up on the street or park in the streets around. So parking is a big thing, and the more parking you have, the better. Also, access to transportation hubs. Again, where we are in Cork, we're I think 4 minutes walk to the train station and an equal walk just in the opposite direction to the main bus central station hub. So buses and trains, huge issue. So the more people can get to you, the more accessible you are, the better. So when you're looking at a facility, if you find a facility with a fantastic view and nobody can park there and there's no rooms for the children to do their kids zones and you can't have coffee, you know what? Go for something that's less upmarket and that allows you to do all these things, because these are really, in my opinion, vital in what you need to look for. One other thing. This is a very important year, certainly in the Republic of Ireland, to remember, 1964. I know it was the emergence of a whole load of things, but 1964 is huge here from a planning point of view. Really boring, I know. But in 1964, Irish planning law changed. Any building that was built before 1964 is exempt from what they call change of usage. But any building built after 1964, it's designated. So you go to an industrial estate, that's where there's a lot of warehouses, and you want to set up church there. You really need to try and get official change of usage from your local authority. If the building was built before 1964, which our first 2 buildings were, we didn't have to bother with that. That's a huge advantage. Why? Well, you can keep on meeting even if you don't have official planning from the local council. But if somebody comes into your meeting and falls, like, you should have public liability insurance. It's easy to get. But if somebody has an accident, when the insurance company will investigate where that took place, if they discover that you didn't have a change of usage from your local council, they'll use that as an opt-out from paying out injury money to someone who was injured in your meeting. So protect yourself and protect your church, and if it's possible, try and go for a legal building if you can. There is a grey area, and that's where some of the city councils and county councils offer something like called a letter of comfort, real Irish, isn't it? It's like where they say, well, you don't have planning permission, but we'll turn a blind eye. You're kind of okay. You know, it's this weird grey area. But if you can anyway, 1964, it's a simple question and it'll save you a lot of hassle. Here's some more of my experience, two very different ladies coming up on the screen. So we have Marilyn Monroe on one side. I don't know if you can see it on the film, but anyway, we've got Marilyn Monroe on one side and the religious depiction of Mary on the other side. Why have I put these photographs up? Well, this is our experience of venues. One of our venues was a bridge club, the card game Bridge. And the guy who owned that club, in the gents' bathroom area and all the corridor leading down to it, was all big posters of naked women, particularly Marilyn Monroe and her type. So here we are, a Christian church, coming in. We're saying, what are we going to do with all these nude photographs? And so we had to do something. So every Sunday morning, we would put black crepe paper with a bit of blue tack and just block all of these naked images. It was the only thing we could do. They were literally nailed into the wall. Imagine to hang up your manhead, you know. But we would block all the images, and that's just part of what it was. And we didn't want our kids or our young men or old men, whatever, to be stumbled. So this is the reality of renting a facility. You don't know what you'll get. On the other end of the spectrum, the school that we were meeting in for almost a decade, in one of the main meeting halls, we had 3 statues of Mary. Now, you know, with all due respect to people's faith and belief, we didn't particularly want to be worshipping God with, you know, something that wasn't really in our belief system. So every time we would have a meeting, part of our work was to lift the statues of Mary down and put them in a cupboard. And we were doing that for quite a while. And then one day, and it was my fault, mea culpa, me maxima culpa, I remember taking up the statue of Mary and I was talking to someone, and whatever thing, I chopped off her nose. It was me. So I had to go into the statue shop in Cork and pay over church money to buy a replacement statue of Mary. You heard it first in St. Mark's at Salt. So if anybody comes up with a photograph of social media of me with my collar up buying a statue of Mary, that was the situation. So this is what happened. So if you're looking for the perfect venue, you're not going to get it. There will always be a compromise. I said many a decade, my love, many a decade. So whether it was Marilyn Monroe or Mary, these were the issues that we faced, and there always will be. I can always remember in the school we met in, Clina would have been there many a time. I can remember this time of the year was really intense. Schools, in my opinion, are a great venue to rent part-time, but they would be doing the junior cert and the leaving cert, the Irish state exams coming up in next week or the week after, and all of the halls were done out, and we would have to remove the tables, but we'd have to take photographs first, because every table with the names had to be put back exactly the same. Oh, it was crazy, you know, so this was a huge logistical nightmare for us, but it was the only way we could get access to all of these halls every Sunday. The school probably technically shouldn't have done it, but there was never any issue. But these are the kind of things you face. So when you have your own building, yeah, it's way easier. But you gotta just go with the flow with this stuff and take it on the chin like a man or a woman.
They got higher scores today.
That's it. They did. There was a great atmosphere there, no doubt. One thing you could consider if you feel that your only solution is to rent a building part-time, and this is what we did in the suburb of Douglas in Cork, is consider renting a full-time church office. We weren't able to get a full-time facility, but it was fairly easy and affordable to get a full-time church office, and this gave our church community a little bit of a hub, and we were able to run some of our really small meetings here all of our main meetings were run in the school, but the small meetings were run here. And we had 3 offices, a small suite of 3 offices. And it really did become the hub of the church. So if you wanted to meet with one of the staff members, if there was a team meeting, I ran outreaches here. Many as a person got saved in these rather grotty offices, but they served purpose. They also really helped us with our second venue, because the second venue we had didn't have any ancillary rooms for children. So just a few doors down, we rented this full-time office, and all of our kids' work took place in those 3 offices on a Sunday. So think outside the box a bit. Just because you don't have a full-time building and you're renting a school or a theatre or whatever, doesn't mean you can't have something. So consider the possibility of running a church office. Let me tell you about our experience. Here are some photographs. Again, I'm not sure if you can pick it up on the screen. Sorry, I've done that again. Here we go. This was our first location in Cork. It was the ICA Hall in the suburb of Douglas. ICA stands for Irish Country Women's Association. So it was built in like the 30s or 40s, and it looks very rural, but it actually isn't. It's just right next to a park. And this was a great venue for us to begin with. It could seat at a real squeeze 100 people. But when we started, there was about, including children, maybe 14 or 15 of us. And we would sit in a circle and we tried to think of creative ideas of eating up the space so it didn't feel so empty. And I remember we had bean bags in one corner and we had kids' toys in another corner. And that's how it was at the beginning. And it took us a while. I remember the first well over 2 years, we almost didn't, we didn't see anybody really come to faith. About 2 years into our existence, we saw one person come to faith, but that person was a pure nutcase, broke our hearts. I won't say who it was. So, it really took us a while to learn and to find our feet. But this venue was great. It had its own storeroom. It had one ancillary room, which was great for the kids' work. We had our own kitchen. We could do the coffee and tea. And it was great because the women who ran the hall gave us our own key, and we were able to come and go. And we had it for Sunday morning, and I think it was a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night as well. It was actually very pretty. There's a stream running just inside the gate, and it was quite a wide stream, and we would do baptisms in the stream when people started coming to faith there. And then I'll always remember one Sunday morning, it was raining heavily and the stream flooded, and literally the flood came in right halfway through the meeting, and we had to abandon the meeting. And I can remember some of the young guys thought they were Superman, and they were helping some of the children and women out over the flood. And my own son, at the end of that escapade, said that was the best meeting I was ever at. So that's our memory. So, you'd never probably think of an Irish Country Women's Association hall, but I would suggest you think outside the box a bit rather than just always going for the standard hall that you could rent. These people were really good to us, and we really enjoyed our time there. The church grew there. We were there from 97 to 2001, and by 2001, we were doing what we called a back-to-back Sunday service, where we would have one set of worship, the sermon, and then another set of worship. And because the kids stayed in with us and they would go out to, at the time, Sunday school, we found that people could choose which worship session they could go to, and there was still enough room for the preaching or the message. So that really worked for us, and then when it was just full, we had to leave, obviously. And we went not too far away to this venue, which was, I mentioned it already, the Bridge Card Club. It was a nice venue, and we were there for 4 years. This is where Marilyn Monroe strutted her stuff. And again, it worked well for us, and we expanded there. It was quite plush with lovely carpet and so on. The buildings were okay too. Slight difficulty with parking. You had to park a little bit below or a bit above, but it all worked well. And again, we were happy there. We grew there. Any place that we rented, we went the extra mile when it came to cleaning. Very often we would come in on a Sunday morning, let's say, and the place would be quite dirty or untidy, and we never complained. We always tried to go the extra mile, and we would clean it, and we would leave it far cleaner than we ever got it. We always made sure our landlords were paid their rent on time, and they never had any trouble. And if that, you just worked up brownie points, as it were, for yourself, so that when there was some issue, some child kicked a window in, or like I smashed the nose off the statue, you just have extra grace. So always try and build relationship. In Ireland, everything is about relationship. So try and build a relationship with whoever the person is responsible for the building. It really will help you, and it'll go a long way. And then our last major venue before we got our own full-time facility was this place, Deer Park School. We were there for 10 years. And again, we, you know, how do you get into schools? This was a Christian Brothers school. And traditionally in Ireland, the Christian Brothers, along with some of the other Catholic religious communities, would have been seen as quite hostile to our type of church. But I actually found the contrary. And we got in here because one of our church members was a teacher there. So if there's someone in your community who's a teacher in a school, you've got an automatic in to the principal. And the way it normally works with most schools is the principal makes the call, and then he or she will probably need to get approval from some central body. Now, the Christian Brothers have withdrawn from a day-to-day point of view in most of the schools in Ireland, but there is a place in Dublin here called St. Helens, and they will make the final decision. And in our experience, because so many of the older Christian Brothers were out in Nigeria as missionaries, they came across Pentecostal churches all the time there, and they have a bit of an understanding. And we were very fortunate because one of the main older brothers, still loosely connected to this school, had another school, and an African church had rented it, and he had had a good experience with them. So we had a lot of advantages, but if you can get into a school, in my opinion, they can be one of the better venues, by far cheaper to rent than a hotel, a lot more flexible, believe it or not. And I was reading about a month ago that the Department of Education, again, forgive me for those from the north, but here in the Republic, Department of Education are trying to bring in this new policy where schools are expected to earn so much of their own income themselves. Now that's fantastic if you're a church and you're looking for a venue, because everybody knows the big schools and it's an easy enough in your community. Now, when we were there in this school, our rent would pay for one of their cleaners. When we left, they had to make that cleaner redundant. But this is the difference. It'll pay for a caretaker, it'll pay for a cleaner. So don't go into this thinking they're against you. The way current government policy is going, they're probably going to be very interested because your selling point is you're going to be 52 weeks a year. Like, that's huge. Most of the other tenants that use this school only used it for about 8 months of the year. But you're 52 weeks of the year. That's brilliant. One of the things you have to put up with being in a school, and we did, is other groups using the facility at the same time. For us, it was a soccer team, a soccer club, and we had the indoors and they had the outdoors. But you know, we had the same small car park, and there was often a lot of issues with parking. You just got to take it on the chin again. But schools are great. We had storage there, we had use of the kitchens there, and the school gave us the keys. We had the code for the alarm. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. So make life easy for yourself if you can. This is way better, in my opinion, than a hotel. You're going to a hotel, I doubt very much you'll get 52 Sundays of the year. One of the big things with a church is that you're always there. You start closing down or taking holidays, I just think people lose confidence really, because they're not sure whether you're going to be there or not. The school usually will offer you 52 weeks of the year. A hotel probably won't. You take the guys up in Derry, they were using one of the big arts centres, Cornerstone Church, and I know they couldn't get it every Sunday, and that's quite typical with the nice venues. So if it's possible, get a school. This is where we are now. This is before the building was finally done, but we're on McCurtain Street, right in the heart of the city, and to have your own building is a huge, we're over 3 floors, we go quite back, quite deep. We have a courtyard and a small car park as well. Our cafe church is down on the street there, our main auditorium is on the first floor, and so on. And then we have a load of community areas on the top floor, kids, youth, cinema thing, all of that. So this is where we are now, and it is transformational if you have your own full-time building. But don't let anyone tell you that you have to have a full-time building for your church to grow. If we want to expand biblical Christianity in Ireland, we have to have portable churches, renting facilities, part-time. So as I come towards a close, and we can have questions and answers in just a moment, just think of all of these. I've put them down in order. School, I think, is possibly one of the best. A community centre or community hall, they're meant to serve the community, so you're part of the community if you've got a congregation. Quirky buildings, like I've put down creche there. A lot of people don't consider creches, but they're almost never used on a Sunday morning. If they're operating as a creche, they probably, as a commercial business, have had to get a change of usage from the council, so they're legal, and they're usually big enough and they've got facilities for kids. Maybe a creche would be good, something quirky outside the box, sports club, a theatre, art centre, another church. This is something you can consider. It's possibly the first port of call. I just wonder though, because there tends to be a confusion if two very different churches are using the same building. A very generous denomination in my experience is the Methodist Church in Ireland. They tend to be very generous in allowing other churches to use their buildings, but they do of course use it on a Sunday morning. So maybe you want to have your main service on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday night. These are things to consider. You've got the cinemas, as I mentioned, and you've also got the hotels. So my brief here this morning was to talk about being a portable church. These are some of the experiences I've learned over the years, and it's very possible to really grow your church if the other aspects of being a good church, if you've got them together. So here's some ideas of venues that you could consider.